Hi, Dawn the Stitching Coach here. Subscribers will remember my thank you video where I introduced myself by telling you a few of my favorite things and asked for a few of yours. One of those things is my love of making things that are beautiful and useful. Today, I'm going to pair that with one of my pet peeves, wasting things. But first, if you're not a subscriber, remember to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell below for notifications. Now, join me over at the craft table. Most knitters who have been tossing the floss for a while probably have a collection of these. I don't know about you, but that messes with my hygge, and I'm ready to let go of things like clutter in my sewing space. In that spirit, we'll be using these bits of yarn to make a memory blanket using Tiki Knit's pattern. In this video, I will be using the free version of the Knit Companion app. My favorite features include access to locally saved files, your Ravelry library, and Dropbox. Now, open your pattern and you will see the pages as thumbnails in the top left. Another key feature is a horizontal highlighter bar that moves with your touch, and a vertical bar to mark which column of the pattern you are working on. Next is a bookmark or placeholder. This red diamond reacts to your touch when held in place for a few seconds, and moves when you hold your finger in a new spot. There are generous amounts of row counters, especially handy for complicated patterns with multiple parts to keep track. Changing the row counter is as easy as pointing, and changing the marker up or down requires a few seconds hold on the counter. Note-taking and other features are not available on the free version. You can also rotate the pages and rename the project. Here's a photo of the blanket we will start. Let's name it When Life Gives You Scraps. Now that you have your pile of yarn, your pattern, you'll also need needles. Since I'm using worsted weight in this video, you'll be able to use between a 6 or an 8. So I'm going to use a size 6 knitting needle. You'll also need a stitch counter or your favorite knitting app. You'll also need a darning needle to weave in the ends later. And you'll need 2 stitch markers. I recommend using at least 1 stitch marker that opens up like a safety pin. And I'll tell you why later. All right, so now that we've got these items out of our knitting case, we'll put that aside. The first part of the pattern is square 1. Square 1 looks like this. It has this really great bias strip down at a 45-degree angle. And each square is going to get added on to one of the sides as we go along. And I'll show you a more complete version at the end of the video. But this is square 1. So we need to cast on 40 stitches. So I've grabbed one of my scraps, and I'm going to be doing what's called a German twisted cast on. But first, if you don't know what weight yarn you have, here's a great way to figure that out. The first thing you need to do is grab a pencil, something that's a uniform shape. You're going to grab the end of your tail and hold it with your finger, and you're going to wrap it around the pencil at least 15 times. Maybe more, depending on the weight of your yarn. And then we're going to measure to see how many wraps per inch. You might see that as WPI. So I'm going to wrap this around once more, and then I'm going to grab a ruler, and I'm going to take the ruler and I'm going to lay it right up against those wraps on my pencil. Again, you're wrapping it just right, not too loose, not too tight, just right. So I'm going to lay that right here on the edge of my wraps, and I'm going to count how many wraps I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 wraps. And about 8 wraps per inch is worsted weight. So great. I'm doing okay. I'm going to have to do that with each scrap that I use to make sure that I'm using the same weight. Otherwise, your squares won't match up. Now that I've figured out that I do have a worsted weight, I now need to figure out how long of a tail I'll need for my cast on. So I'm going to wrap my yarn around my knitting needle 10 times to represent 10 stitches. Oops. So 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So these are going to represent 10 stitches. And if I'm knitting 40 if I'm casting on 40 stitches, I'm going to now have 20. 20 is going to make 40. So I'm just lining it up, halfway point here. So I'm going to do one more 20 just for good measure. So I have 3 times what I need for my cast on. So whatever you're doing, times 3. So now I've created a slip knot. Again, we may have talked about this in other videos, but a slip knot is called a slip knot because you pull opposite ends and it slips right out. So again, you're going to cross it over until you get X marks the spot. You're going to reach into that hole and pull the string through that loop and make it tight. You're going to put your needle through that hole and then pull both sides to tighten. This is your first stitch. So now for the German twisted cast on, it's very similar to a long tail cast on with a little bit of a twist. What you're going to do is you have the tail going over your thumb like it's making a U-turn, and you have the ball of yarn on your index finger, and you're holding it almost like a slingshot. The first thing you're going to do is go under both strands that are on your thumb, rotate it around and between those two, and then bring it back over to grab the one that's on your index finger, and then you're going to pull it right underneath that X, and then you're going to slide that until it's taut against your needle. So I'll show you that again. We're going to go under both, around, and duck it in between. So we're grabbing that second side around the thumb, pulling it so we have an X. See that X right there? Pulling it over, grabbing the one on the index finger, letting that loop go, and then pulling with your thumb to make it taut. I now have 3 stitches. I need 40 stitches on my needle, so we're going to meet back at the end. Under, around, over, pick up, tighten. Under, around, through there, over, pick up, and tighten. All right, see you back here at 40 stitches. And 40. Now that we have 40 stitches cast on, we're now going to make sure that we're on row 1. So in my stitch counter, I'm going to mark it at row 1. I'm going to make sure that I am making my counter at row 1. And now I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to knit row 1. According to the pattern, row 1 is a wrong side row. So I want to make sure that I know that this is a wrong side row. So I'm going to mark my side that's wrong with a marker that's like a safety pin, one that opens up and can be repositioned. And we'll move this up a little bit later on. But for now, I'm going to put it there so that I don't forget that this is my wrong side row. I have to just knit across, and then when I get to 20, I'm going to place my other marker on the knitting needle. All right, so to knit this, we're just going to knit it as normal, however you knit, whether it's with your left hand or your right hand. I'll see you back here at stitch number 20. 19, and here is 20. So now we're going to place our stitch marker onto the needle, and we'll finish knitting this row. See you back here at the end. Okay, we're now at the end of row 1. Row 2, remember to make sure you use your counter or your app to keep track. So now I'm on row 2. I'm going to move this to row 2, and I'm going to move my highlighter down to make sure I keep track of my place. Turn my work, so now I'm back to the starting point, and row 2 is a right side row. And on every right side row, we're going to be decreasing on either side of our stitch marker. So when we get to 2 before and 2 after, we're going to be decreasing. 2 before are going to be knit 2 together. The 2 after the marker are going to be a slip, slip, knit. And I'll show you how that works. So I'll get to stitch number 18, and then I'll meet you back here. Make sure to pause if you want to get caught up. And 18. Now we're going to knit 2 together. And to do that, just like we would knit with 1, we're going to knit 2. So we're going to go into that second stitch, through the second stitch and the first stitch. So both are on the needle. We're going to take that around, and we're going to duck this under and through both stitches, and then pull that off. Just like stitching 1, but instead of 1, we now have 2. And it now has this sort of right leaning slant to it. I'm going to transfer my needle, my stitch marker rather, and now I'm going to knit 2 by slipping and then knitting through the back. So I'm going to insert my needle as if I'm going to knit the stitch and slip it off. And then same thing, I'm going to slip it as if I'm going to knit the stitch and then slip it off onto the right hand needle. And now I'm going to enter those stitches with the left hand needle in to the front of those stitches. Careful not to split those. And then now my right hand needle is in the back of those stitches. So I'm going to wrap it around, duck that under, and pull both those stitches off. And that has a left leaning slant to it. So these 2 decreases are great if you need a left or right leaning slant to your decrease. Now we need to finish knitting this row, so I'll see you back here at stitch 40. Pause here if you want to go ahead and knit this. Now we're at the end of row 2. In the pattern, it says repeat rows 1 and 2 until you have 2 stitches. Okay, now we move the highlighter and marker to row 1. Pause here to knit rows 1 and 2 until you have 2 stitches left. Okay, as you can see, I've run out of yarn, which is not a problem. We just need to find, even if you don't have the same exact yarn, find a coordinating. Pick one of the colors out of the yarn if it's variegated like this one, or find a contrasting or coordinating yarn that goes well with this. And as you can see, we started off flat, and like a little Christmas miracle, with all these decreases, we are now almost at a complete square. So if I move this off onto the cord, you can see how we're really close to getting to that square. And what we're going to do is now we're going to join a yarn so that we can finish this square. So let's go through our pile and let's grab some yarns that look like they might work. So I'm going to kind of test the colors first. That one definitely won't work. No, let's don't do a variegated with a variegated. So we're going to eliminate those. So all the variegateds are coming out. So now let's look at a solid. That red isn't quite right. The oranges, these are maybes. I'll keep these aside. Yellow, no, don't think so. Green is definitely not the right shade. So now I'm down to these. I think I like this blue one the best. So let's put these back in our scrap bin. And we're now going to join our yarn. So I'm going to put this in my bowl, and I want to do this on a right side row. If you are doing this on a wrong side row, you're going to get a little dash not only on the front but also on the back. So you can see here, this is the back side. So you see this where I picked up and joined to this other square. So it creates this little dash on the wrong side. But if you join the yarn on the wrong side, you get the dashes on both sides. So I don't want that. I want it to look like this, where I have a right side and a wrong side. Again, you've got the dashes on one side, the dashes are here, so that's the wrong side, and a right side without the dashes. Okay, so to do that, again, on a right side row, so here's our wrong side with the marker, and here's our right side without the marker. I'm going to join the yarn about 6-inch tail, and I'm going to add it with my existing yarn because I still have a little bit of yarn left, so I want to use all of that up. And I'm going to knit both together. Oh, before we do that, let's double check and make sure that we do have a worsted weight yarn. Always triple check. Match it up with your old yarn, and we're going to knit these together. So wrap both around and knit until we get to 2 stitches before the marker. Remember, on the right side row, we're going to be decreasing those 2 stitches before and the 2 stitches after. So we're getting there, and here we are at our 2 stitches before the marker. So we're going to be knit 2 together. So carefully, without splitting those stitches, put your needle through both stitches, wrap that around, pull those off, slip your marker, and now we're going to slip as if we're knitting, slip as if we're knitting. Place your left-hand needle into the front of those 2 stitches that are now a little bit twisted. Wrap your yarn around the back needle that's in the back of those stitches, and off they go. And now we're going to finish that row, and then we'll keep knitting until we're out of the old yarn and keep going with the new yarn. Okay, now we're at this point where we're making our last 2 stitches. So now I can remove the marker and then slip, slip, knit these last 2 stitches. And now we're going to do the last row 1. So now we have 2 stitches, and we're on a wrong side row. So we're going to knit those. So we're repeating row 1 according to the pattern. Now when we turn our work, we're going to cast off. And this is how that works. Casting off or binding off are the same thing. So I'm going to knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to knit the second stitch, and I'm going to pull that first stitch over the last stitch. And then I'm going to pull the yarn all the way through. If it's really long, so I still have a pretty decent amount of yarn I can use for another square, I'm now going to cut that tail off and pull it the rest of the way through. Okay, so now I have 2 tails, well actually 3 tails to join in later. I'm going to leave my stitch marker on here so that I can tell which is my wrong side row, or my wrong side of the square. And then here's where your darning needle comes into play. We want to make sure that we are anchoring our threads on the wrong side. This isn't marked, so it's our right side row, but you see I have this little guy hanging out here. So I'm going to tuck him into the other side by grabbing that little tail and pulling it through the other side. If it's too flimsy or if it doesn't want to go through the eye of the needle, you can also use a crochet hook. Now that's on the wrong side. And I can also now anchor my tails. I'll show you with this first one, and then you guys have this for the others. So this first one I'm going to do, I'll show you both two ways. One way is to consider the parts of the garter stitch. You have a smile and a frown, a smile and a frown. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up into this stitch, and we're going to go down into the smile. Sorry, down into the frown. Up into a smile, down into the frown. Make sure you're getting the whole stitch. So I'm going to keep doing that. Up into a smile, down into a frown. Several times. Now I'm going to switch and go the opposite direction. I was going left to right, so now I'm going to go right to left. And I'm going to go up to the next row above so that I can go down into the frown, up into the smile, down to a frown, up into a smile, and then down into the last frown. And it's nearly invisible. You can't even see it. The other method is to go at a diagonal through the smiles and frowns. So I'm going to grab this frown. I'm going to grab, no, this is a smile. And I'm going to grab this frown. And then I'm going to grab the next smile up and the next frown over. And then same thing. I'm going to keep grabbing until we get to the center where it starts to shift. And now I'm going to do the opposite direction. So now I'm going to go, I'm piercing this one. I'm splitting the yarns and I'm going across at a 45-degree angle. And I'm catching each smile and each frown at an angle until I get to the side. Okay. And once I get there, I'm going to go into the side once more and do a little small knot. Oops, there we go. And now I can clip that off. Cast that away. So that's how the two ways you can anchor your threads on the back of your work. You can leave these and use them when you're joining for the other squares, and we'll do the other squares in another video. But for now, this is square number 1 of the mitered squared memory blanket by Tiki Knits. You can find it on Ravelry. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Bye.